Before there were borders, before there were flags, before there were names on maps, there was this. A continent teeming with life. With nations. With languages, medicines, astronomy, agriculture, law. Over 600 distinct civilizations. Tens of millions of people. This is their story, and what was done to them. By conservative estimates, between 60 and 100 million indigenous people lived in the Americas before European contact. The Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy, had a democratic constitution so sophisticated that scholars believe it directly inspired the framers of the U.S. Constitution. The Mississippi city of Cahokia had a population larger than London in the year 1100. The Maya had mapped the stars with precision that would not be matched in Europe for centuries. This was not a wilderness. This was a world. In 1492, Christopher Columbus landed on the shores of the Taino people in what is now the Bahamas. He wrote in his journal that they were well built, with good bodies and handsome features. And then he wrote this. They would make fine servants. Within 2 generations the Taino people were functionally extinct. Not from battle. From slavery, starvation, and disease, used as a weapon. The smallpox epidemic of the early 1600s swept through New England before the Pilgrims ever arrived. In some nations, 90% of the population died. Entire lineages, erased. Languages, silenced forever. Sacred knowledge, lost. But disease alone does not explain what followed. What followed was policy. In 1493, Pope Alexander VI issued a church decree called Interque Terra. It declared that any land not inhabited by Christians could be seized. The indigenous people of the Americas, despite living there for 15,000 years, were legally declared to not exist as landowners. This doctrine was not merely historical. In 2005, the United States Supreme Court cited the doctrine of discovery as legally valid precedent. It was only formally repudiated by the Vatican in 2023. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act. The Cherokee Nation, a people who had adopted a written language, a constitutional government and peaceful coexistence, were dragged from their homes at gunpoint. Over 16,000 Cherokee were force-marched 800 miles through brutal winter to Indian Territory in Oklahoma. More than 4,000 died. The Cherokee called it Untold, the trail where they cried. November 29, 1864. Sand Creek, Colorado. U.S. Army Colonel John Chivington led 700 soldiers against a peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho encampment flying a U.S. flag, a sign of protection. They killed between 150 and 500 people. Mostly women, children, and elders. Soldiers collected body parts as trophies. Chivington was celebrated in Denver as a hero. He was never charged with a crime. History books called it the Battle of Sand Creek. There was no battle. There was a massacre. Kill the Indian, save the man. These were the words of Captain Richard Henry Pratt, founder of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in 1879. The U.S. government forcibly removed hundreds of thousands of indigenous children from their families, some as young as 4 years old. At these boarding schools, children were forbidden to speak their language, forbidden to practice their religion, given European names, cut off from all family contact, beaten for remembering who they were. In 2021, the discovery of over 1,000 unmarked children's graves at a former Canadian residential school shocked the world. In the United States, over 50 such schools have been identified. The investigation is ongoing. At the time of European contact, indigenous peoples occupied virtually the entire continent. Through 500 treaties signed with the United States government, every single one was broken. Not most of them. Every single one. By 1934, indigenous peoples had lost over 90 million acres, 2/3 of what remained after the Indian Removal Act. Let us speak plainly about numbers. In 1492, an estimated 60 to 100 million indigenous people in the Americas. By 1900, fewer than 250,000 remained in the United States alone. Scholars who study genocide, who study the Holocaust, Rwanda, Armenia, use the same word here. Genocide, the deliberate destruction of a people. Not metaphorically. By definition. And yet, in most American textbooks this history spans a paragraph, sometimes a page, usually with the word conflict. Not genocide. Conflict. They did not disappear quietly. Tecumseh built a pan-tribal confederacy that nearly stopped American westward expansion. Sitting Bull refused to surrender Lakota land until the U.S. Army surrounded his people and starved them into submission. In 1973, the American Indian movement occupied Wounded Knee for 71 days, demanding the U.S. government honor its treaties. In 2016, thousands gathered at Standing Rock to protect their water and their sacred land, and were met with attack dogs and water cannons in sub-zero temperatures. The resistance never ended. They never stopped fighting. And they are still here. There are over 574 federally recognized tribal nations in the United States today. There are more than 6 million indigenous people living, breathing, loving, creating, governing, and fighting in the country built on their land. They carry languages that survived attempts at erasure. They carry ceremonies that survived attempts at extinction. They carry grief, and they carry grace. The textbooks did not show you this history because history, when it is honest, demands something from the living. It demands accountability. It demands repair. It demands that we say, out loud, clearly, without flinching, what happened here? Now you know.